Teacher harasses autistic boy over homework, then learns he's a future Olympian. The classroom buzzed with the usual chaos of a Monday morning. Papers rustled, pencils tapped against desks, and chatter filled the air as the students at Maplewood Elementary settled into their seats. At the front of the room, Mr. Bennett adjusted his tie, exasperated as he shuffled through the stack of incomplete homework assignments on his desk. "All right, everyone," Mr. Bennett called out, his voice stern. "Quiet down. We're going to go over last week's assignment." The class groaned collectively, but one student sat silently, his gaze fixed on the wooden surface of his desk. 9-year-old Lucas Cole clutched his pencil tightly, his knuckles white. Homework was his least favorite subject, and the growing pile of incomplete assignments had become a constant source of anxiety. "Lucas," Mr. Bennett said, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the classroom. "Do you have your homework this time, or are you going to give me another excuse?" Lucas froze, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of his classmates' stares, the heat rising in his cheeks. Slowly, he shook his head. "No, sir," he murmured, barely audible. Mr. Bennett's face twisted in frustration. "Unbelievable. This is the third week in a row, Lucas. How hard is it to sit down and finish a few worksheets? The other students manage just fine." Lucas shrank in his seat, his shoulders curling inward. Words swirled in his mind, apologies, explanations, but none of them made it out. He struggled to articulate what he felt, how the pages of numbers and words on the worksheets seemed to blur together, leaving him overwhelmed and confused. "Do you have any idea how important this is?" Mr. Bennett continued, his voice rising. "You won't get anywhere in life if you can't even do your homework." The classroom fell silent, the tension palpable. Lucas bit his lip, willing himself not to cry. He hated feeling like this, like he didn't belong, like he was constantly falling short. But no matter how hard he tried, it seemed like he could never keep up. At lunch, Lucas sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, picking at the sandwich his mom had packed for him. He could still hear Mr. Bennett's words echoing in his mind, a relentless loop of criticism that made his chest feel tight. "Hey, Lucas," a voice called, breaking through his thoughts. He looked up to see Emily, one of the friendlier kids in his class, standing nearby with a tray in her hands. "Can I sit here?" Lucas nodded, though he didn't say anything. Emily sat down and gave him a small smile. "Don't let Mr. Bennett get to you," she said after a moment. "He's mean to everyone." Lucas shrugged, his gaze dropping back to his uneaten sandwich. "It's not just him," he muttered. "I'm bad at homework. I'm bad at everything." "That's not true," Emily said firmly. "You're not bad at everything. You're just different." Lucas frowned, unsure how to respond. He'd heard the words different used to describe him before, and it always felt like a double-edged sword. Sometimes it meant special, unique. Other times, it felt like a polite way of saying he didn't fit in. "You like running, right?" Emily asked, changing the subject. Lucas perked up slightly, nodding. Running was the one thing that made him feel free, like he could escape the noise and confusion that often filled his mind. He spent hours at the park near his house, sprinting up and down the trails until his legs ached and his heart raced. "You're really fast," Emily said, her tone genuine. "I've seen you at recess. Maybe you should join the track team." Lucas shook his head quickly, his expression anxious. "Oh, I'm not good enough." "You don't know that unless you try," Emily said. "And besides, it's not about being the best. It's about doing something you love." Lucas didn't respond, but her words stayed with him for the rest of the day. The following week, the school announced tryouts for the track and field team. Lucas saw the flyer in the hallway and hesitated, his heart racing as he read the details. The idea of joining the team terrified him. He didn't like crowds or attention, and the thought of competing in front of people made his stomach churn. But a small part of him couldn't help but wonder, what if he was good enough? What if running was the one thing he could excel at? That afternoon, as he walked home from school, Lucas decided to stop by the park. He set his backpack on a bench and kicked off his shoes, the cool grass soft beneath his feet. Taking a deep breath, he started to run. The familiar rhythm of his footsteps calmed his racing thoughts, each stride propelling him forward as the world around him blurred. He didn't think about homework or Mr. Bennett or the weight of expectations pressing down on him. All he thought about was the wind on his face and the ground beneath him, steady and unyielding. By the time he stopped, his chest heaving and his legs trembling, he felt lighter than he had in days. The next morning, Lucas handed in his permission slip for the track tryouts. He didn't tell anyone, not his mom, not Emily, and certainly not Mr. Bennett. He didn't want to deal with the questions or the doubt. This was something he wanted to do for himself. When the day of the tryouts arrived, Lucas stood nervously at the edge of the track, surrounded by other kids who seemed far more confident than he felt. The coach, a tall woman with a warm smile, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone," she said. "Today's all about seeing what you can do. Don't worry about being perfect, just give it your best shot." Lucas nodded silently, his hands trembling as he waited for his turn. When the coach finally called his name, he stepped onto the track, his heart pounding in his ears. "Whenever you're ready," the coach said. Lucas took a deep breath, then bolted forward. The world around him disappeared as he focused on the rhythm of his steps, each stride pushing him closer to the finish line. He didn't think about the other kids or the coach or anything else. He just ran. When he crossed the finish line, he doubled over, his lungs burning as he tried to catch his breath. The coach approached him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Lucas," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "That was incredible. You've got real talent, kid." Lucas stared at her, his chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and pride. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt like he was good at something, really good. A few days later, Lucas was officially added to the track team roster. The news spread quickly through the school, and it wasn't long before Mr. Bennett found out. The teacher called Lucas to his desk after class, his expression skeptical. "Lucas," he said, his tone sharp. "Is it true you're on the track team now?" Lucas nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. Mr. Bennett sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know how you think you're going to balance that with schoolwork. You can't even keep up with your homework as it is." Lucas felt the familiar sting of shame, but this time, it was accompanied by a flicker of defiance. He clenched his fists, his voice quiet but firm as he replied, "I'll figure it out." The track team quickly became Lucas's sanctuary. Each practice was a chance to escape the chaos of the classroom and the relentless criticism of Mr. Bennett. On the track, nothing mattered except the rhythmic pounding of his feet and the rush of air in his lungs. His teammates were kind, cheering him on and treating him like one of their own, even though he was one of the youngest members on the team. Coach Wilson, the tall and encouraging woman who had first noticed Lucas's potential, began working with him one-on-one. She had a sharp eye for detail and an instinct for nurturing talent, but what made her special was her ability to make Lucas feel seen and understood. "Lucas," she said one afternoon as they sat on the bleachers after practice, "do you know how fast you are?" Lucas shrugged, looking down at his sneakers. "I don't know. I just like running." Coach Wilson smiled. "Well, let me tell you. You're faster than most kids your age, and you're only getting better. If you keep this up, you could compete at a very high level someday." Lucas's eyes widened. "Like, in races? Real races?" "Real races," Coach Wilson said. "Maybe even the Junior Olympics. But that's a long way off. Right now, I want you to focus on improving, step by step. Deal?" Lucas nodded, his heart racing, not from exertion, but from excitement. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he wasn't just different in a bad way. Maybe he was different in a way that made him special. Meanwhile, Mr. Bennett's skepticism about Lucas's participation in the track team only grew. He couldn't understand how a boy who struggled so much with basic classroom tasks could excel at something as demanding as track. It didn't make sense to him, and his frustration boiled over during a parent-teacher conference with Lucas's mother. "Mrs. Cole," Mr. Bennett began, his tone clipped, "I'm concerned about Lucas. He's consistently behind on his homework, and his classroom performance leaves much to be desired." Mrs. Cole, a kind but fiercely protective woman, frowned. "I understand he struggles with homework, but he's trying his best." "With all due respect," Mr. Bennett said, his voice tinged with condescension, "trying isn't enough. If Lucas spent less time on extracurricular activities and more time focusing on his studies, he might actually start making progress. Mrs. Cole's expression hardened. Lucas has been through a lot, and running is something that helps him. It's not just a hobby, it's a part of who he is. Mr. Bennet leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. I'm not saying he shouldn't run, but he needs to learn priorities. Life isn't going to cut him any slack just because he's different. Mrs. Cole's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Lucas isn't just different, Mr. Bennet. He's extraordinary. And maybe if you spent less time criticizing him and more time trying to understand him, you'd see that too. Lucas, unaware of the tense conversation between his mother and teacher, continued to pour his heart into running. Every practice was a chance to push himself further, to prove, to himself and to others, that he was capable of more than they believed. One Saturday, Coach Wilson invited the team to participate in a regional track meet. It was Lucas's first official competition, and as he stood at the starting line, his nerves threatened to overwhelm him. The crowd was louder than he'd anticipated, the cheers and chatter blending into a cacophony that made his head spin. Focus, Lucas, Coach Wilson said, crouching beside him. Just run your race. Don't worry about anyone else. Lucas nodded, taking a deep breath. When the starting gun fired, he surged forward, his body moving instinctively. The noise of the crowd faded into the background as he focused on the rhythm of his steps, the wind on his face, and the finish line ahead. By the time he crossed the line, his lungs were burning, and his legs felt like jelly. He wasn't sure how he'd done until he heard Coach Wilson shouting from the sidelines. You did it, Lucas. First place. Lucas blinked in disbelief as the realization sank in. He had won. News of Lucas's victory spread quickly through the school. His classmates were surprised but also impressed. Even Emily, who had always believed in him, was amazed by how far he'd come. You're a champion now, she said with a grin as they sat together at lunch. What's next? The Olympics? Lucas blushed, shrugging. I don't know. I just like running. Well, you're really good at it, Emily said. And I think Mr. Bennet should know that too. Lucas frowned. The thought of facing Mr. Bennet made his stomach twist. No matter how well he did on the track, it seemed like his teacher would always find something to criticize. The turning point came during a school assembly a few weeks later. The principal, a kind woman with a knack for celebrating her students, had invited Lucas to the stage to recognize his achievement at the track meet. Lucas Cole, she announced, has shown us all the power of perseverance. His dedication to running and his recent victory are a reminder that every student has unique strengths and talents. The auditorium erupted into applause as Lucas walked to the stage, his heart pounding. He accepted the certificate the principal handed him, glancing nervously at the crowd. To his surprise, he saw his classmates cheering and even Mr. Bennet watching with a faintly puzzled expression. Later that day, as the students filed out of the classroom, Mr. Bennet called Lucas over to his desk. Lucas, he said, his tone uncharacteristically soft, I wanted to congratulate you on your win. That's quite an accomplishment. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, unsure if this was a trap. Thank you, he said quietly. Mr. Bennet hesitated, then added, I have to admit, I didn't think running was something you'd excel at. But it seems I was wrong. Lucas looked up, startled by the admission. Mr. Bennet's expression was sincere, though there was a hint of guilt in his eyes. You've taught me something, Lucas, he continued. Sometimes, people have strengths we don't immediately see. I'm sorry if I made you feel like I didn't believe in you. Lucas nodded, his chest swelling with a mix of relief and pride. Thank you, Mr. Bennet. From that day forward, Mr. Bennet's attitude toward Lucas began to shift. He still pushed him to complete his homework, but his criticism was tempered with encouragement. He even attended one of Lucas's track meets, cheering from the sidelines as the boy raced to another victory. For Lucas, the change in Mr. Bennet wasn't just about earning his teacher's approval, it was about proving to himself that he was capable of greatness. He continued to train hard, setting his sights on bigger competitions and dreaming of a future where his love of running could take him to incredible heights. And as he stood on the track one sunny afternoon, the wind on his face and the finish line ahead, Lucas knew one thing for certain: he wasn't just running to win. He was running to show the world, and himself, that he was unstoppable. The months that followed marked a remarkable transformation in Lucas's life. His success on the track didn't just earn him trophies, it brought him a sense of confidence he'd never known before. With every race, he felt stronger, more capable, and more certain of who he was. And though his academic struggles hadn't disappeared entirely, the support he received from Coach Wilson, his teammates, and even Mr. Bennett made a world of difference. Lucas's hard work and determination eventually earned him a spot at the state championships. It was the biggest race of his life so far, and as the day approached, his family and friends rallied around him. Emily made posters with glittery letters spelling out "Go Lucas," while his mom arranged for their relatives to come and watch. Even Mr. Bennett surprised him by offering words of encouragement after class one day. "I heard you're going to the state championships," Mr. Bennett said, stopping Lucas on his way out the door. "That's a big deal. Good luck out there." Lucas blinked, momentarily stunned. "Thank you," he said, the words feeling strange but good. "Remember," Mr. Bennett added, his tone softer than usual, "running isn't just about winning. It's about finding out what you're capable of. And I think you're capable of a lot." Lucas nodded, his heart swelling. It wasn't exactly a full apology for the way Mr. Bennett had treated him in the past, but it was a step forward, and for Lucas, that was enough. The morning of the state championships dawned bright and clear. The stadium was packed with spectators, the air buzzing with excitement. Lucas stood at the starting line, his nerves a mix of anticipation and fear. This wasn't just another race, it was a chance to prove himself on a stage bigger than anything he'd ever experienced. As he warmed up, Coach Wilson approached him, her expression calm and steady. "How are you feeling, Lucas?" "Nervous," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. "That's normal," she said with a reassuring smile. "But remember, you've trained for this. You've put in the work. Trust yourself and run your race." Lucas nodded, taking a deep breath. He glanced up into the stands, where his mom, Emily, and the rest of his supporters were waving and cheering. Even Mr. Bennett was there, sitting quietly but clapping along with the crowd. When the announcer called the runners to the line, Lucas took his position, his heart pounding. The other competitors looked focused and confident, their eyes fixed on the track ahead. Lucas forced himself to do the same, blocking out the noise and the doubts swirling in his mind. The starting gun fired and he exploded off the line. The race was a blur of movement and sound, his legs pumping and his breath coming in rhythmic bursts. Lucas focused on his form, his stride, and the runners ahead of him. He knew he wasn't the fastest out of the gate, but Coach Wilson had taught him the importance of pacing himself, of saving his energy for the final stretch. As the race progressed, he began to close the gap, overtaking one runner after another. By the final lap, he was in third place, the finish line just ahead. His legs ached, his lungs burned, but he pushed himself harder than ever before, the cheers of the crowd fading into the background as he surged forward. In the final moments, Lucas gave everything he had, crossing the finish line just a fraction of a second behind the first-place runner. He collapsed onto the track, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. When he looked up, he saw Coach Wilson running toward him, her face lit with pride. "Lucas, you did it," she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. "Second place at the state championships. That's incredible." Lucas smiled, his exhaustion giving way to pure joy. He had done it. He had proven to himself and everyone else that he belonged here. The celebration that followed was one Lucas would never forget. His teammates lifted him onto their shoulders, chanting his name as the crowd applauded. His mom hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face as she told him how proud she was. Even Mr. Bennett approached him afterward, his usual stern demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "Lucas," he said, extending a hand. "That was an incredible race. You've come a long way." "Thank you," Lucas said, shaking his hand. "That means a lot." Mr. Bennett hesitated, then added, "I was wrong about you. I let my assumptions get in the way of seeing who you really are. I'm sorry for that." Lucas looked up at him, his expression thoughtful. "It's okay," he said after a moment. "I guess I proved us both wrong." Mr. Bennett chuckled, nodding. You certainly did. Lucas's success at the state championships opened up new opportunities for him. He was invited to join an elite training program for young athletes, where he would have access to top-tier coaching and resources. It was a chance to take his running to the next level, and though the prospect was daunting, Lucas knew he was ready. At the same time, his experiences had sparked a newfound sense of purpose. Running had given him a voice, a way to express himself when words had failed. Now, he wanted to use that voice to help others, to show kids like him that being different wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. With the support of his mom, Coach Wilson, and even Mr. Bennett, Lucas began visiting schools and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging other kids to pursue their passions. His message was simple but powerful: find what makes you happy, and don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. Years later, Lucas stood on the starting line of the Junior Olympics, the culmination of years of hard work and perseverance. The stadium was packed with thousands of spectators, the energy electric as the world's best young athletes prepared to compete. As he stretched and focused his breathing, Lucas thought back to the boy he had been. The boy who had sat alone in the cafeteria, who had struggled with homework, who had been dismissed and underestimated. That boy was still a part of him, but he was no longer defined by his struggles. He was defined by his resilience, his determination, and the people who had believed in him when it mattered most. The starting gun fired, and Lucas surged forward, his heart full of gratitude and hope. This race wasn't just about winning, it was about celebrating how far he'd come and the limitless potential of what lay ahead. Back home, his mom, Emily, and even Mr. Bennett watched the race on TV, their cheers filling the room as Lucas sprinted toward the finish line. No matter the outcome, they knew one thing for certain: Lucas had already won in every way that mattered. The roar of the stadium echoed in Lucas's ears as he crossed the finish line at the Junior Olympics. The moment felt surreal, like a dream he had imagined so many times that he almost didn't believe it was real. His legs trembled with exhaustion, and his lungs burned as he gasped for air, but the sight of his name on the leaderboard brought a wave of emotions crashing over him. Lucas Cole, second place. It wasn't first, but to Lucas, it was more than enough. He had made it. He was a junior Olympic medalist, a title that once seemed as unattainable as the moon. Coach Wilson was the first to reach him on the track, her arms wide and her face glowing with pride. "You did it, Lucas," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight hug. "You ran the race of your life." Lucas could barely speak, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "Thank you," he managed, his voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "For everything." His teammates crowded around him next, cheering and patting him on the back. The support felt overwhelming but comforting, a reminder of how far he had come and how many people had believed in him along the way. As the medal ceremony began, Lucas stood on the podium with a silver medal draped around his neck, his heart pounding with pride. The national anthem played for the gold medalist, but Lucas found himself lost in his own thoughts, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about his mom, who had always supported him even when the world seemed stacked against them. He thought about Emily, who had encouraged him to run in the first place. And, surprisingly, he thought about Mr. Bennett, the teacher who had once doubted him but had come to recognize his potential and offer his support. When the ceremony ended, Lucas stepped off the podium to find his mom waiting for him with tears streaming down her face. She wrapped him in a tight hug, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Lucas," she said. "You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of it." Lucas hugged her back, his own eyes stinging with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." The flight home from the Junior Olympics felt bittersweet. Lucas was proud of what he had accomplished, but he also knew this was just the beginning. The experience had ignited a fire in him, a determination to keep pushing himself and see how far his talent could take him. Back at school, Lucas returned to a hero's welcome. The hallways were lined with banners and posters congratulating him, and his classmates treated him like a celebrity. Even Mr. Bennett, who had once been his harshest critic, joined in the celebration. "Lucas," Mr. Bennett said, pulling him aside after class, "I've been teaching for a long time, and I've seen a lot of students come and go. But I've never been prouder of a student than I am of you. You've shown me, and everyone else, that there's more than one way to succeed. Lucas smiled, his chest swelling with pride. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. That means a lot. And don't think I've forgotten about your homework, Mr. Bennett added with a teasing grin. Even junior Olympians have to study. Lucas laughed, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in years. I'll get it done, I promise. The next few years were a whirlwind of training, competitions, and personal growth. Lucas continued to balance his academic responsibilities with his athletic pursuits, finding a rhythm that worked for him. He wasn't perfect. There were still days when the demands of school felt overwhelming or when self-doubt crept in, but he had learned how to navigate those challenges with the support of his family, friends, and coaches. By the time he graduated from high school, Lucas had earned a scholarship to a prestigious university with a renowned track and field program. The opportunity was a dream come true, but it also came with new pressures and expectations. As he packed his bags for college, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Are you ready for this? His mom asked as they loaded the last suitcase into the car. Lucas nodded, though his stomach churned with anticipation. Yeah, he said. I think I am. His mom placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. Remember, no matter where you go or what you do, we're always here for you. I know, Lucas said, his voice filled with gratitude. And I'm going to make you proud. College brought new challenges and opportunities. The level of competition was higher than anything Lucas had experienced before, and the rigorous training pushed him to his limits. But it also brought him a sense of purpose and belonging. He thrived under the guidance of his new coach, who recognized his potential and encouraged him to dream even bigger. By his junior year, Lucas had become one of the top collegiate runners in the country. His name began to appear in conversations about the Olympics, a possibility that once seemed too far-fetched to even consider. Lucas, his coach said after a particularly grueling practice, I think you're ready to take the next step. The Olympic trials are coming up, and I want you to compete. Lucas stared at him, his heart pounding. The Olympics? Are you serious? Dead serious, the coach said. You've got what it takes. Now it's up to you to prove it. The months leading up to the Olympic trials were some of the hardest of Lucas's life. He trained relentlessly, pushing himself to new limits as he prepared to face the best runners in the country. The pressure was immense, but Lucas drew strength from the people who had supported him every step of the way. When the day of the trials arrived, Lucas stood on the track, his heart racing as he looked at the competitors around him. These were the fastest runners in the nation, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But Lucas reminded himself of what Coach Wilson had told him years ago. Trust yourself and run your race. When the starting gun fired, Lucas exploded off the line, his body moving with a precision and power honed through years of training. The race was a blur of effort and determination, each stride carrying him closer to his goal. As he crossed the finish line, he looked up at the scoreboard, his chest heaving. His name flashed across the screen, next to a single word, qualified. Lucas dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had done it. He was going to the Olympics. The journey to the Olympics was a culmination of everything Lucas had worked for, a testament to his resilience, his talent, and the support of the people who had believed in him. When he stepped onto the track in Tokyo, the weight of his journey settled on his shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like wings. As the starting gun fired and Lucas surged forward, he thought about all the moments that had brought him here. The struggles, the victories, the people who had lifted him up. This wasn't just his race, it was theirs too. When he crossed the finish line, his heart full of pride and gratitude, Lucas knew that he had already won. No matter the medal, no matter the time, he had proven to himself and the world that he was capable of greatness. And as the cheers of the crowd filled the stadium, Lucas smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of a story still waiting to be written. Lucas's performance at the Olympics was nothing short of extraordinary. Though he didn't win a medal in his first games, his determination and the grace with which he competed captured the hearts of millions. Commentators praised his story, labeling him a symbol of perseverance and proof that potential can be found in the most unexpected places. For Lucas, the experience was not just about racing, it was about inspiring others and proving that hard work could rewrite any narrative. When he returned home after the games, he was greeted with a hero's welcome. His town organized a parade in his honor, with students from his old school holding banners that read Lucas Cole, our hometown hero. He waved at the crowd from the back of a convertible, his face flushed with equal parts pride and disbelief. "I never thought this would happen," he murmured to his mom, who sat beside him in the car. "You earned this, Lucas," she said, her voice firm but warm. "You've worked harder than anyone I know, and you deserve every bit of this." Among the crowd stood Mr. Bennett, clapping enthusiastically as Lucas passed by. Though he had once doubted Lucas, he now counted himself as one of his biggest supporters. He had even started telling his current students about Lucas's story, using it as an example of why it was important to never underestimate someone. Later that evening, as the festivities died down, Lucas sat in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by medals, photographs, and news clippings. Though his success had brought him fame and recognition, he still felt like the same boy who had found solace in running when everything else felt overwhelming. He thought about the people who had helped him along the way: his mom, Emily, Coach Wilson, and yes, even Mr. Bennett. Without them, he wouldn't be where he was today. The months after the Olympics were a whirlwind of interviews, sponsorship offers, and speaking engagements. Lucas embraced his new role as a public figure, using his platform to advocate for autism awareness and support for young athletes. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even corporate events, sharing his story and encouraging others to embrace their unique talents. One day, Lucas received an invitation to speak at a national conference on autism. The event was designed to highlight the achievements of individuals on the spectrum and to promote understanding and inclusion. Lucas accepted immediately, feeling honored to be part of such an important conversation. At the conference, he stood before a packed auditorium, his palms sweating as he adjusted the microphone. Public speaking didn't come naturally to him. It was a skill he'd had to work hard to develop, but he knew how important his message was. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "My name is Lucas Cole, and I'm here to share my story. Not because I think it's extraordinary, but because I want to show that everyone has something extraordinary inside them." He paused, scanning the faces in the audience. Some were parents, looking for hope for their own children. Others were educators, eager to learn how to better support their students. And some were young people like Lucas had once been, quiet, unsure of themselves, but filled with potential. "When I was a kid, I struggled in school," Lucas continued. "I had a hard time with homework, I didn't always fit in, and I often felt like I wasn't good enough. But I found something that gave me confidence: running. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of people who doubted me, including myself. But with the support of my family, friends, and coaches, I discovered that I could do more than I ever imagined." He smiled, his gaze softening. "I'm here today because I want you to know that your differences aren't weaknesses. They're your strengths. And when you find the thing that makes you feel alive, the thing you're passionate about, hold on to it. Because that's where your greatness lies." The audience erupted into applause, and as Lucas stepped off the stage, he felt a sense of fulfillment that rivaled even his proudest moments on the track. Meanwhile, Lucas's competitive career continued to flourish. He qualified for his second Olympics, this time with a clear goal in mind: to bring home a medal. His training was grueling, pushing his body and mind to their limits, but he was driven by the belief that he was capable of achieving greatness. At the Games, Lucas competed in the 400-meter race, one of the most demanding events in track and field. The competition was fierce, with runners from around the world vying for the podium. As he stepped onto the track, the stadium buzzing with energy, Lucas reminded himself of everything he had learned over the years: trust your training, run your race, and believe in yourself. When the starting gun fired, Lucas surged forward, his body moving with precision and power. The race was a blur of effort and determination, each stride carrying him closer to the finish line. As he approached the final stretch, he dug deep, summoning every ounce of strength and willpower he had. When he crossed the finish line, he looked up at the scoreboard, his chest heaving. His name flashed on the screen, next to the words bronze medal. Lucas collapsed onto the track, tears streaming down his face as the realization sank in. He had done it. He was an Olympic medalist. The medal ceremony was a moment Lucas would never forget. As the bronze medal was placed around his neck, he felt the weight of not just the medal, but of everything it represented: years of hard work, countless setbacks, and the unwavering support of the people who had believed in him. When the national anthem played for the gold medalist, Lucas stood tall, his heart filled with pride. After the ceremony, Lucas called his mom, who had watched the race from home. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I did it. I got a medal." "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw the whole thing. I'm so proud of you, Lucas." "Thank you," he said, wiping his eyes. "For everything." Lucas's bronze medal solidified his place in the world of elite athletics, but it also reinforced his commitment to giving back. He continued to advocate for autism awareness, using his story to inspire others and promote inclusion in sports and education. He also launched a foundation to provide resources and support for young athletes on the spectrum, ensuring that they had the opportunities he had once struggled to find. Through it all, Lucas remained grounded, never forgetting where he had come from or the people who had helped him along the way. He often visited his old school, speaking to students and reminding them that greatness could come from the most unexpected places. One day, as he stood in front of a classroom filled with wide-eyed kids, he spotted Mr. Bennett sitting quietly in the back. After the talk, the two of them caught up, sharing a moment of reflection and mutual respect. "You've come a long way, Lucas," Mr. Bennett said, his voice warm. "I'm glad I got to be part of your journey." "Thank you," Lucas replied, his smile genuine. "You taught me a lot, even when I didn't realize it." As the years went on, Lucas's legacy continued to grow. He competed in multiple Olympics, bringing home more medals and setting records that inspired a new generation of athletes. But more importantly, he left a lasting impact off the track, proving that determination, resilience, and kindness could change the world. And as he stood on the track one final time, preparing for his last race, Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. He wasn't just running for himself, he was running for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And as the starting gun fired, he surged forward, his heart full of pride, knowing that his story was far from over. Lucas's final race at the Olympics marked the end of an era, not just for him, but for everyone who had followed his journey. The race was everything he had hoped it would be: competitive, thrilling, and deeply meaningful. As he crossed the finish line for the last time, securing a silver medal, the crowd erupted into applause, honoring not just his performance, but the incredible career that had inspired so many. After the medal ceremony, Lucas walked a victory lap around the track, waving to the cheering fans and soaking in the moment. He thought of his younger self, the boy who had struggled to complete his homework, who had been overlooked and underestimated, and smiled. That boy had come so far, and Lucas knew he had carried him every step of the way. The transition from professional athlete to the next chapter of his life wasn't easy. For years, Lucas's identity had been tied to running, to the competitions, and to the discipline that had shaped his days. But he knew he had more to give, more to accomplish beyond the track. He decided to focus on expanding the foundation he had started, dedicating himself to helping others achieve their dreams. The Lucas Cole Foundation quickly grew into a global organization, offering scholarships, training programs, and mentorship opportunities for young athletes, particularly those with autism. Lucas traveled the world, visiting schools, sports clubs, and community centers, sharing his story and encouraging others to embrace their unique abilities. At one event, a young boy approached Lucas, clutching a worn pair of running shoes. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice shy but filled with admiration, "I want to be a runner like you someday." Lucas knelt to meet the boy's gaze, his smile warm. "You already are," he said. "Keep running, and never let anyone tell you what you can or can't do." The boy's eyes lit up, and in that moment, Lucas saw a reflection of himself, full of dreams, doubts, and potential. As Lucas's foundation grew, so did his impact. He worked tirelessly to break down barriers in sports and education, advocating for policies that promoted inclusion and understanding. His efforts earned him numerous accolades, including a humanitarian award presented at a prestigious global summit. During his acceptance speech, Lucas addressed a packed audience of leaders, athletes, and activists. When I was a child, he began, I often felt like I didn't belong. The world around me seemed designed for people who were different from me, and I struggled to find my place. But running gave me a way to express myself, to prove to the world, and to myself, that I was capable of greatness. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Today, I stand here not because of what I accomplished on the track, but because of the people who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. My mission now is to pay that forward, to ensure that every child, no matter their circumstances, has the chance to discover their own greatness. The audience rose to their feet, the applause thunderous. Lucas stood tall, his heart full of gratitude and determination. Back home, Lucas's personal life flourished as well. He reconnected with Emily, his childhood friend, who had always believed in him. Their friendship deepened over time, and eventually, it blossomed into something more. The two of them built a life together, one filled with laughter, love, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. Years later, Lucas and Emily welcomed their first child, a boy they named Max. From the moment Max took his first steps, Lucas saw a spark of determination in his son's eyes, a spark that reminded him of his own journey. Do you think he'll be a runner? Emily asked one evening as they watched Max toddle across the living room, clutching a toy airplane. Maybe, Lucas said with a smile. But whatever he chooses, I'll be there to support him. Emily leaned against him, her voice soft. You're going to be an amazing father. And you're going to be an amazing mom, Lucas replied, wrapping his arm around her. As Max grew older, Lucas shared stories of his own childhood, of the struggles he had faced, the people who had helped him, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He wanted Max to know that greatness wasn't about being perfect. It was about perseverance, kindness, and staying true to yourself. One day, as they walked through the park near their home, Max turned to Lucas with a thoughtful expression. Dad, he said, did you ever feel scared when people didn't believe in you? All the time, Lucas admitted. But I learned that what matters most isn't what other people think. It's what you believe about yourself. And I'll always believe in you. Max smiled, his small hand slipping into Lucas's. I believe in you too. Though Lucas had retired from competitive running, he remained deeply involved in the sport. He became a coach and mentor, working with young athletes and helping them navigate the challenges of training, competition, and self-doubt. His athletes often described him as patient, understanding, and fiercely dedicated, qualities that had been shaped by his own experiences. One of his men's, a talented runner named Mia, reminded Lucas of himself. She was determined but often struggled with self-confidence, doubting her ability to succeed. Coach, Mia said one afternoon after a tough practice, what if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Lucas crouched beside her, his voice steady and reassuring. Mia, do you know what the most important part of running is? She shook her head, her brow furrowed. It's not winning, Lucas said. It's showing up. Every time you step onto the track, you're proving that you're strong, brave, and capable. And even if you stumble, even if you don't win, you're still moving forward. That's what matters. Mia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Thanks, coach. You've got this, Lucas said. I believe in you. As Lucas approached his 40s, he began to reflect on the legacy he wanted to leave behind. His foundation had helped thousands of young athletes, and his story had inspired countless others, but he felt there was still more to do. He decided to write a book, a memoir that would capture not just his journey, but the lessons he had learned along the way. The process was challenging, forcing Lucas to revisit moments of pain and vulnerability. But it was also cathartic, a chance to celebrate the triumphs and the people who had shaped his life. When the book, titled Running Toward the Light, was published, it became an instant bestseller. Readers praised its honesty, warmth, and the powerful message at its core, that everyone, no matter their circumstances, has the potential to achieve greatness. At the book launch event, Lucas stood before a crowd of supporters, his voice filled with emotion as he spoke. This book is more than my story, he said. It's a testament to the power of resilience, community, and believing in yourself. My hope is that it inspires you to chase your dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. In the years that followed, Lucas continued to touch lives through his work, his writing, and his unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. He watched as Max grew into a confident and compassionate young man, forging his own path with the same determination that had driven Lucas all those years ago. One evening, as Lucas and Emily sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lucas took a deep breath, his heart full. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asked. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "All the time. It's amazing how far you've come, Lucas. And how many lives you've changed." Lucas nodded, his gaze distant but content. "It's been an incredible journey. And I couldn't have done it without you." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "You've given so much, Lucas. And the best part is, your story isn't over yet." Lucas smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. She was right. His story wasn't over, it was still unfolding, one step at a time, like the steady rhythm of a runner's stride. And as he looked out at the world ahead, he knew that the best was yet to come.